Hey, Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So we just concluded an interview with Casey Harrison of the Dyslexia Classroom. She has her own podcast also, and the Wimberley Dyslexia and Learning Center.
Yes, and Casey is a bright spot in the dyslexia world as well. She is a certified academic language therapist, licensed dyslexia therapist in Texas, and a certified structured literacy dyslexia specialist for IDA. She's also a qualified teacher with over 27 years of experience.
She had a lot of really good information to work with to students and parents and teachers. And she does this similar work with parents and teachers and pre-K through 12 students at her private practice, where she provides dyslexia therapy, literacy instruction, consultations, resources, and training.
Yes, and I was surprised to hear that not only does she do all of those things, but she's also on the national board for ALTA. And because of all of her hard work, she's going to be recognized for the ALTA Cox Award. Yay, Casey!
Yay! We've had lots of good news about awards here lately.
Yes.
But also, in addition to her private practice, we just kind of mentioned it. She has a podcast, Together in Literacy, which focuses on dyslexia, literacy instruction, and the whole child.
So I think it's important for people to check out her website. She has a lot of great resources on there. That's where you can buy her book, which is Teaching Beyond the Diagnosis, Empowering Students with Dyslexia. And she has an unwavering support and dedication to advocating for all students, especially those with dyslexia. So let's check her out because she's awesome.
Yeah, she is pretty awesome. And hope you enjoy this episode of the Dyslexia Duo. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, this is Amy
and Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, certified academic language therapists. We started our own businesses and now we have a podcast called The Dyslexia Duo.
So join us for our informative podcast where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us!
Amy.
So today we have with us a very special guest. We've been after her for a while to come on the podcast, and she's a busy, busy woman, especially lately. She is all over my social media. So I'd like to introduce to our audience today, this is Casey Harrison.
Hey, Casey. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to our listeners, and share a little bit about your background?
Sure. I am really grateful to be here with Melissa and Amy of the Dyslexia Duo. But my name is Casey Harrison. I am an educator, an advocate, and founder of the Dyslexia Classroom and Wimberley Dyslexia and Learning Center. Really just kind of a space dedicated to empowering educators and supporting families and our students, and just really helping to create that positive change for students with dyslexia and other reading difficulties. As far as my educational journey, I've spent years in the classroom and beyond, working closely with schools and different organizations and communities to raise awareness around structured literacy and the science of reading, particularly in the area of dyslexia. And I'm a certified academic language therapist. I have been a dyslexia therapist for the last 17 years. It was great training, something I've really enjoyed.
So what curriculum are you trained in, or curricula? You have more than one.
More than one, yes. I'm really fortunate. I did my original therapist training in Take Flight. And so I've utilized that program for many years. And in addition to that, I'm trained in basic language skills. I was fortunate enough to work at a specialized dyslexia school, and that was the curriculum that we used there.
Is that NIHouse?
Yes, that was out of NIHouse. Mm-hmm.
Nice. So you got the two big ones.
Yeah.
The Dallas side, the the Houston side.
Houston side. Yep.
Sure, for sure.
So what kind of articles have you authored or co-authored?
Yeah, I have written articles and resources focused on evidence-based practices, equitable literacy instruction, and how we can better support our diverse learners, especially those with dyslexia. So my writing has been featured in professional journals and online publications and has been shared across educator networks. So writing things like in EdView 360, I have an article in Distinct Magazine, Understood, several others, Ed Weekly and Writer's Digest and several others. I don't want to name them all, but I also have a new book called Teaching Beyond the Diagnosis, Empowering Students with Dyslexia. So I'm excited about that entering the world.
Yes, you're a busy lady.
Yeah, it's very inspiring to see all that you're doing. Makes me feel like I'm standing still.
No, I think we are all really contributing. And one of the things that I love about the field of education is that I really believe in that ripple effect, and every single thing that each of us are contributing is making an impact. And we may not see how far that reach goes, but we're all making an impact every day.
That's so kind of you to say. And, it's sometimes we all get in our daily routine and our grind. And sometimes you don't stop and think about what you're really doing and how that impacts people. So that's a nice way to think of it. Thanks, Casey.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to be here and spend some time chatting with fellow educators and experts like yourselves, and just kind of digging into current research and sharing some stories from the field, and hopefully offering some practical tips for our listeners.
Yes, we're looking forward to it. Let's dig in. So where did you start in your classroom? Like what grade level?
Yeah, I love that question. Have been very fortunate. I actually have taught across the country. I began my teaching experience in California, just outside of Oakland, and I was the multi-language learner classroom. So I had students from all around the world. I think there was only a handful of kids that spoke the same language. That was a very interesting experience. And I really got to learn a lot about our multi-language learners and best practices for supporting them in an English classroom. Yeah. And then from there, I went and I taught in South Phoenix, Arizona. It was called Black Family Child Services. And it was a school that was connected to the services that were provided to the community. And that was a really great experience. I got to learn a lot. And from there, I went and I taught in Columbus Public Schools in Ohio. And I taught on the east side at a little school called Arlington Park. What I loved about that school was, if you're familiar with Ohio and Columbus, that is kind of the heart of balanced literacy. And yet at my school, we taught direct instruction with the capital D, capital I, Dr. Engelman's direct instruction. So if you have not heard of the Project Read and the report about, direct instruction and its impacts and the benefits of direct instruction, I think you'll start to hear more and more about that. Your listeners will, as they're kind of maybe stepping into the science of reading, they may start to hear more about direct instruction as a program and Dr. Engelman. But that was fantastic. And I really feel like each of these little stops along my educational journey led me to where I am today. So today I have a private practice in Texas. Now, when I was in Ohio, I actually was in the classroom for some time. I taught kindergarten, first grade, in all of those different settings. And then I was moved to district, and that's where I was a literacy facilitator for multiple schools. And at that time, we were actually writing a curriculum, which was called LACES. It was interesting because that was in 2000, when the National Reading Panel came out, and our curriculum that we were writing really was aligned. And it's interesting to see kind of 25 years later, here we are again, still talking about the National Reading Panel and still having districts wanting the best curriculum that they can to support their learners.
So all of your varied experience has led you to be able to culminate information to write a book. And you've got your new book that's out. What is that titled again?
Yes, it is called Teaching Beyond the Diagnosis, Empowering Students with Dyslexia.
Yep. Fabulous. What I've gone through, I haven't finished it, and, preaching to the choir through the whole book. I'm just like, yeah, All right. Yeah. Hands up. Hallelujah.
So, what is the overall message you wanted to send out with that book?
It's really kind of bringing together all of the experiences that I've had and really bringing forth what's called an integrated framework, which is what I work on in my practice. It is something that I'm really passionate about, making sure that our students have an understanding of dyslexia, not just in the academic components, but beyond that. And so, working now with dyslexic learners for the last 17 years, it's really been one of the most rewarding opportunities that I've had, but it's also one of the most challenging every day because each of my students brings their personal journey and their educational story with them. And while those stories may differ from student to student, really at the heart of it lies a path, a journey with dyslexia. And that encompasses not only the academics, but so much more. And so through this, really, I began to see dyslexia as so much more than just what I had read in books. I really started to see it as a journey, something that really needs to be addressed, of course, through the academics, but really requires perhaps for us to lean into more of an integration of other factors. And so through that, I created the integrated framework, which is really just what I've put into practice at my center. And so where we can bring together my students, their families, the educators who serve them, a deeper understanding of dyslexia and how with intention we can acknowledge and weave together all of these different parts to empower our students. And so in the integrated framework, we look at deepening our understanding of dyslexia with appropriate academic instruction and support, fostering those executive function skills and metacognitive processes, along with critical thinking skills for both the teacher and the students, and then supporting students in self-advocacy skills and knowledge of accommodations to really help them embrace success and self-confidence. And so that's the work that I do. And that really is what my goal was, to bring that forth to the reader.
Can you share the graphics so our audience can see when they look on YouTube what the graphic looks like? I think having that visual will be super helpful.
So here is that integrated framework. Yeah, and so you can see it really is kind of weaving together all of these components. I think for me, this sort of came about because as I myself realized, gosh, I did not have enough knowledge of dyslexia. That was not something that was covered in my classes. It took me really until I was working here in Austin, Texas as a teacher. And there were always these kids that I just felt like I was not serving them to the best of my ability. I didn't have enough knowledge. There were kids that were falling through the cracks. Was doing all the things that I knew to do, and I wasn't meeting their needs. And that sent me on a journey to learn more. And I ended up discovering that, hey, there's this thing called certified academic language therapist. And that means you're a dyslexia therapist. And I'm like, what is this? I want to know more. And so I just jumped right on in and never looked back. And so that really set the stage for me to have a deeper understanding of dyslexia and to really dive into the academics. And what I loved about that was I felt like for me, it filled a lot of the holes that I had in my own educational journey, things that I was missing. And now it just made so much more sense. And I felt so much more equipped to best serve students. And then sitting across from the humans, the students, right? I started to see, gosh, there's other pieces that these students need. And I want them to feel successful, and I want them to understand what those metacognitive processes are that support them, and what are those executive function skills that I can bring into my lessons so that they really are empowered and they understand their accommodations and they feel successful enough and feel confident enough to be advocates in their own journey. If we understand dyslexia is lifelong, and yes, we can work on closing that academic gap, but those threads of dyslexia remain. And so I want my students to really have the skills and confidence to speak to that forever.
And Melissa and I have talked about how when we were in college, that, well, I was much older than both of y'all, but I know when I was in college, maybe one class, one day for 10 minutes talked about dyslexia. And then I was hired on in a position and I was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how to teach anybody how to read. And then even when I got my master's, there was one teacher for one assignment who talked about dyslexia. And that was 2018 when I got my master's. And I thought, my goodness, why are we still not teaching these teachers what they need to know? You know, I still feel like we're not preparing our teachers as they come out of college.
No, I think we're currently in a shift where we're starting to see some change, but yeah, we're not there yet.
I wonder, Casey, in your experience, and Amy too, I've had parents ask me, well, how long should it take to go through the therapy and things of that nature? I know just from my own experience, I can say that it takes at least a year to start seeing changes that are in the positive direction to the point where they're being able to start putting words together to read. I don't know if you guys see that too, but really to start making those changes where they look like effective readers, I would say 2 years. Do you guys feel like you notice the same? And do you think that your integrative framework would maybe speed up the process? How do you feel like that could be used to change therapy?
Yeah, I love that question. Well, I think one of the big things that I always talk to parents about is understanding the student's learning profile. So if we understand, and I do talk to parents a lot about how, what dyslexia is, how dyslexia exists on a continuum. And when we talk about how dyslexia exists on a continuum, I can really speak to them about where their child is in terms of their learning profile. So if I have a child that may have coexisting ADHD, that may impact that. Or if I have a student on their learning profile who also is showing an area of deficit in working memory, it is most likely going to take us a little bit more time to get to mastery because of the increase in intensity and the increase in repetition. That retrieval practices. So I find it beneficial to have a deep understanding of the student's learning profile, not just, okay, the student has dyslexia, move forward, but really to look at it more as a lens of, okay, we've done this testing. Now let's use that information to teach and to treat, so that testing information should really lead us to the best curriculum and procedures and practices for that particular student that's sitting in front of us.
We're also therapists. We're more than a curriculum. We use that curriculum to guide us, but therapeutically, like you said, every student exists on a continuum or on a spectrum. And how I'm going to approach, even within, and I say this all the time, even within a group, what I'm going to do with this child is going to be different than what I'm going to do, or how I'm going to say it, or the expectations I have for this child over here, even though they might even be in the same grade, same group.
Yeah. So you may, for example, if you have a student who has a working memory retrieval deficit on their learning profile, even if they're in a group setting, I may call on that student more often for that retrieval during those individual practices, so that they're having more of that opportunity for that retrieval practice. So there's things that we can be really intentional in our delivery of instruction based on our students' learning profile.
Very good. So with all that how would you define dyslexia at this point in the game? I feel like I almost feel like it is a shapeshifter of a identification. Every year we find out it feels like something different.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's always an interesting question, because we do have a great deal of information about dyslexia, and yet it still remains kind of clouded in misunderstandings or myths. And I think, that may be due to the fact that dyslexia does, as we said, exist on a continuum. And so therefore, the things that are visible to people, such as poor reading and spelling, they really can impact individuals differently. And so, we might have one student that's struggling with reading like single syllable words. Another student may be able to read grade level material, but they're reading it at a really disfluent rate. And maybe we have another student who is severely, their spelling is severely impacted. At the most basic understanding of dyslexia, we can note that it is difficulty in reading and spelling words, but as we know, it really is so much more. I think when I'm talking to parents and even other educators, I do reference the current International Dyslexia Association's definition, where we really kind of note that it is neurobiological in origin, that it is those variants in the brain processing system are there from birth. No parent did anything wrong. This is just the way that the students, that's their variant in their brain, and that's okay, and it's beautiful, and that is where we are. And I think if we're moving towards honoring that neurodiversity and understanding that we all have variants in our brains, and we can kind of shift this to, yes, we know that dyslexia can be really hard. It can be really hard. It means we're going to have to work harder in this. But one thing I always want my students to know, and I want my parents to know, is that we're, as human beings, we all have things that are more challenging and things that come more easily to us. And so for us to recognize that, hey, this dyslexia part might be really hard. It might be really hard for us to accomplish the reading and the writing skills that we want to. We're going to get there. It's going to take some hard work, but we're going to get there. But we also have all of these beautiful things that come a lot easier to us. And I think that it's important to honor both of those.
What I love about our dyslexic students is that they work so hard. They work so hard and they don't stop. And my gosh, what is that work ethic going to do for them later in their life? They're used to putting out effort like that. They're only going to be a successful adult later on.
And there's something really powerful about also overcoming some challenges, right? Mm-hmm. That is something that, each day when my students come in and there's something that they've learned and, they're starting to see that progress, they're very proud of themselves, and they should be. And so they can see how hard that work that they're putting in is, that the outcome of that hard work. And I think that is, as you said, Amy, is a lesson that's a lifelong lesson that will benefit them. Mm-hmm. I was just going to say at this point too, researchers and educators and neuroscientists have had a lot of conversations regarding defining dyslexia. And even with the current definition from the International Dyslexia Association, these are still conversations that are ongoing. And our field is continuing to try to refine a definition of dyslexia. So as Amy said, it's kind of a moving target at times, but we do know a lot about dyslexia, and we also know some best ways to treat it.
Did IDA redefine it? I remember that was part of the conference, right?
Not yet. They're in the process. There's a committee that's working on a definition. But I think it took them the first time several years. So
what Dr. Mather said is that every few years, or maybe it's Dr. Hasbrook, I can't remember, every few years they go back through. And it sounded like from when we were at IDA, it sounded like everybody had a different section that they were working on for not that I know, because I was just a fly on the wall. Melissa and I were just going, what? But when we were interviewing Dr. Mather at IDA, that's when Dr. Motes came up and started talking to her about her section on the definition. And she's like, well, I disagree with that. I'm like, what do you disagree with?
Yeah, I think they're still in the lots of conversations stage. So
we'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents. because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi, this is Amy Rodenroth, and as part of the Dyslexia Duo podcast team and owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services, I want to talk to you about my business. Our CALT trained team offers expert virtual or in-person therapy located in Prosper, Texas, using proven dyslexia curricula like Take Flight, Build, MTA, alphabetic phonics, and reading by design. We also provide crucial independent evaluations and advocacy services. Don't wait. Empower your child today. Visit www.discovereed.com to learn more. That again is www.discoveread.com. Discovereed, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show.
So we talk about the definition of dyslexia, and how does that then, now that we know kind of what dyslexia is and we've been made aware of it over decades now, how do you think dyslexia awareness has changed?
I love that question. I think it's come a long way. You know, when I first began teaching, as I said, I don't think that I heard of dyslexia, maybe, you know, in one of my undergraduate courses, but really beyond that, it was not at the forefront of the education system or conversations or professional development. And so I am really pleased that we now have more conversations regarding dyslexia, and we have dyslexia handbooks in a lot of our states across the US. There are grassroots organizations like Decoding Dyslexia and larger platforms that really are starting to bring awareness to the general community, but we still have a long way to go. I think for us as dyslexia advocates to help spread even more awareness, there are some things that we can do. One, you know, is just being really consistent in our messaging. So, you know, as we have conversations surrounding dyslexia and with dyslexia starting to kind of be in more of a mainstream conversation, along with that also comes a lot of misinformation or sharing of myths. So I think if we can kind of counter that by spreading a really consistent message, that is really beneficial. So providing that messaging that's going to be like rooted in research, rooting in the science behind dyslexia and reading instruction that we have, you know, had through our training, and sharing that in conversations with parents, educators, even the students themselves in our communities really can create a current of knowledge and can establish us as a source of support. And then it's always interesting to me whenever someone will say, "Oh, well, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a dyslexia therapist." Like, it never fails that someone's like, "Oh, my uncle or my dad or my grandma or my mom."
I think I am. Yeah, I get that a lot.
And I think that really does speak also to the prevalence of dyslexia. And you know, the more we can talk about it, the more we can shed some of the stigma and shame that has surrounded dyslexia for some time and kind of start to shift some of that perspective.
That's great answers. Oh my goodness. And I think especially as dyslexia advocates, we have to be mindful with how we respond to others, because we know what's snake oil and we know what's not snake oil. And some people swear by their snake oil, you know, and you have to be careful with how you go about educating that person.
Well, especially because people want to make money off of the fact that parents do want to help their child. So some parents will just pay whatever it is to get them the special lenses or get them the therapy that isn't dyslexia therapy by a certified therapist, or they just will do whatever and kind of get pulled into a misconception in the correct treatment. And you know, the old saying, you can
not that I want to win any flies over, but you win more flies with honey than vinegar or something like that. You want to support their understanding and support their knowledge, but at the same time, gently guide them toward what works, what really truly works.
I think that's really important too, because, when speaking with colleagues or educators, right, if we can share our journey and then also have an understanding that change is uncomfortable, it's uncomfortable for all of us. And something, that we've put our heart and soul into, and then someone's saying like, oh, that's not right, that can feel really icky. And so sometimes having a response kind of set up for like, hey, when I was reading this research, or when I was, when I'm looking at dyslexia, and this is my understanding, and just to kind of understanding that we want to meet people where they are. We want to provide them with the appropriate messaging and the research. But yeah, you can only hold people.
No, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. So tell me if this has happened to you before, because it's happened to me more times than I can count. I was in public ed from 91 to 2001 as a dyslexia person in some way, shape, or form for 27 of those 30 years. And I'd have the teacher meetings that talked about what dyslexia, just the dyslexia orientation for the whole staff. And somebody would invariably come up to me and say, do I have to come? I'm going, well, yeah, you do. And they're like, well, I don't have a dyslexic student. So what do you say to that person? Well, I just said, well, you need to fulfill this requirement, but at the same time, sure you do. You just need to know what to look for. What are your thoughts when somebody says that to you?
Yeah, I think that does come up often. Maybe not as much now as it did back then, but I will often speak to the prevalence, that dyslexia is the most common learning disability that is out there. And so we all have students with dyslexia sitting in our classrooms, whether identified or not. And what that means then for us as educators, whether you are the English teacher or the math teacher or the art teacher or the PE teacher, you need to have an understanding of dyslexia. And sometimes they'll say, well, why? And I'm like, well, because if we understand that dyslexia can impact also beyond reading and writing, or how much reading and writing do you have incorporated into your classroom? And if we also understand that dyslexia is a language-based learning difference, how is your classroom utilizing language? Right. We have language in math. We have language in art. We have language in PE. And for our students with dyslexia, they may need some supports for that language component. So I really just try to, oftentimes if I'm giving a professional development for teachers, I will do kind of like a simulation of sorts, and I will almost tailor it outside of that general English language arts class. So I'll have some that are addressing English language arts, and then I'll try to find an activity that would incorporate maybe a math class or, social studies, things like that, so that they can see how often our students are encountering language and reading and writing throughout their day.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer. And I can't remember who it was. It was either Joan Sedita or maybe it was even Natalie Wetzler talking about writing across the curriculum, and that there's writing in math. Well, shoot, maybe it was even Marilyn Zecker. I can't remember, talking about that there's writing in math, and we need to be thinking about how to comprehend math and how to write math problems and all of that. Dyslexia impacts not just English language arts, but everything.
Yeah. Do you have any kind of input for parents that are going through their ARD meetings and they are trying to come up with accommodation requests. I see this all the time. Parents are requesting, what kind of accommodation should I ask for? And really, my thought is when you get to the ARD committee meeting, everybody should be discussing what they believe is best for the child based on what their knowledge is of the child. And of course, the parent knows best about what their child is and what they bring to the table. But the educator, from the educator perspective, also brings in some good information. So what are your thoughts on accommodations, what the request should be from parents, and or making sure the school follows it and making sure the school understands why they're so important?
I hear a lot of different comments surrounding accommodations, all the way from, wanting every accommodation under the sun to also, or like, I don't want my child to have any accommodations because I didn't have any and they're fine and it's just a crutch. I think what we can do is get people to understand what accommodations are, first and foremost, that they remove a barrier that is there due to a disability. And they provide students with access to their curriculum. And when we think about it that way, when I'm explaining this to parents, then they've kind of released some of this fear that my child is always going to need these things. Another thing that I talk about, and I talk about this in the book as well, is that for me, I look at accommodations as tools. We use tools every day. Right? If there is a tool that is going to help me achieve a task, I'm going to use that tool. And for our students, if they can think about those accommodations as tools, and if we as therapists or interventionists can help the students understand how to use those tools and provide opportunities to practice with those tools, then those become very useful and they are going to actually apply them in their classrooms. So when I'm sitting with parents or I'm talking with teachers and I'm asking them, where are you seeing the breakdown occur? Is that barrier due to that disability? And if so, is there a tool that we can use to help the student overcome that hurdle or remove that barrier? So if we kind of shift that lens, I think that that's a lot more powerful for our kids. It can also kind of remove some of the shame. And I want our teachers to also think about, how is my student accessing those accommodations in the classroom? Is it done in a way where they're like, oh, hey, you need to go get your notes from the back of the room? And my middle schoolers are like dying. They're like, absolutely not. And I'm like, hey, buddy, why are we getting an F in this class? And they're like, oh, I don't use my accommodations. And I'm like, why? So being really mindful of that is so important as well. And then making sure that the students also know how to use the tools. Sometimes I'll have kids and they'll come in and I'll pull up their plan and they either don't know what is on their accommodation list. And I'm like, hey, you have this, right? And they're like, nope, didn't know that. Or they have every single thing checked off. And I'm like, which ones do we need at this point? Right. So it comes back to understanding the learner, understanding what they need, and really setting the stage for success. And so if we're thinking about those accommodations, those are some things that really should be the conversations in those meetings and before the meetings. And then for my parents, I will recommend that they pay attention to when their student has homework. Like, hey, are you noticing that they need a multiplication chart? Are you noticing that they need extra time? Are you having to read the word problems out loud to them and explain what's happening? Do they need like a little chart to help them with steps to go through things? And then the other thing I always have my parents do is start like a little clock. And when you get to 30 minutes, just draw a line and note that this is how long it took us to do this task. Because that extra time piece that I remember Melissa or Amy that you talked about, right? That extra time piece is so important for our students. And I think it's important for the kids to realize like how much they can get done in a set amount of time, as well as the parents and the teachers.
And I think it's important that the teachers also take note of what their students are using regularly and routinely, And I know it can get convoluted, especially once they get to secondary, right? Because the teacher has 150 kids that she might be working with, and it's hard to keep up. And as an aside, as a funny story, because I think, a lot of times my own children went to the same campus I was. And my son told me when he was at one of the secondary campuses I was at, he goes, "Mom, my teacher had read my stories to me today." And I go, "And he's not dyslexic." And I go, "He's autistic, but he's not dyslexic." And I go, "Why?" And he goes, "I don't know. I think she just thought, oh, you're the dyslexia person, so maybe I'm dyslexic." And she just got a little confused. And I go, "Well, honey, did you tell her not to do this? You didn't need it?" He goes, "No, I kind of liked it." Oh my gosh. But I know it's hard to keep up, but really pay attention to what their accommodations are and if they need it or if they don't need it. I think that could be that can be a groundbreaking piece.
Yeah. And really, a lot of times from the teacher lens, like when I'm looking at those accommodation sheets, a lot of them are best practices.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so a lot of teachers like, "Oh yeah, we totally do this in class." I'm like, you do. You are probably doing more of these than you may realize. But when it comes to doing it as an accommodation, we have to come with like that intention, that ensuring that that student is applying that strategy or that accommodation, right? Even if it is a best practice that you're doing with everybody, that's great. We just want to ensure that that particular student who needs that has that there for them.
So I also think accommodations are like an insurance policy. So if the parents leave that school with their child and go to another school, that child walks into that school and they get exactly what they need. There's no downtime. That teacher knows exactly what to do to meet their needs.
Yeah, I agree. And really those accommodations can set our students up for self-advocacy, right? The more that they understand about how they learn, the more they understand about their own dyslexia journey and what accommodations are working for them, when and why. Mm-hmm. That is really empowering for our kids. And that is what leads to those self-advocacy skills that we want our students to have.
And it's going to be watching my children who are not dyslexic, but had accommodations in school, becoming advocates for themselves. And as adults, to my daughter telling her professor, "Hey, I need to go into this other room to do this because there's too much distraction around me." That's huge. That's huge. Knowing that she can't do Zoom classes because there's too much distraction. She has to be in person to attend classes. That's a big deal. And I think this is going to do nothing but make our kids more resilient. Accommodations aren't a crutch. It's leveling that playing field,
Absolutely.
Okay, so in your opinion, Casey, and we're in Texas, we are the hub of dyslexia, Texas dyslexia law. States look to Texas for Texas dyslexia law and what we're supposed to do. Why do you think, not just in Texas, but in other states too, why are we persisting in reading recovery and Fontes and Pinnell and Lucy Calkins, even though I know Lucy Calkins is kind of on the way out a little bit? But why do we persist in that? Now, I do agree with the whole, when we think about the 5 pillars from the National Reading Panel, we can't just linger on phonological awareness, decoding, and fluency. We do need to get to the whole comprehension piece. But you don't start at comprehension and you don't stay just on the first 3 tiers. We've got to integrate all of it. But why do you think so many districts continue to persist in F&P and reading recovery and Lucy Calkins?
I think there is still a lot to learn. And I think part of it probably comes down to funding, that schools have purchased very expensive curriculum. And the other thing is, for us, the more that you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. But for some people too, they might not know that, hey, this doesn't have all the pieces. Because the other thing that comes with knowing is then you know enough to be like, that's missing a component, right? So I think while there are things like ed reports and stuff like that available for districts to look at, I still think we may be a little bit in the checking the boxes for what we're choosing for curriculum. And we might be moving in the right direction, but there are still some things that are needed, particularly when we're talking about our struggling readers or our students with dyslexia. And I'm a little cautious that those students are being left out of some of the conversations that we're focusing so much on tier 1. And I completely agree. We need to have a strong core instruction, 100%. But we also need to treat our students that have dyslexia with appropriate instruction and resources and training for the teachers. I think that that's number one.
Well, they're not dyslexic just in the dyslexia classroom. They're dyslexic everywhere.
Yes.
Yep.
So they do need teachers to be aware, and they do need really some tier 2 instruction in the classroom as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree.
And that really comes being able to provide meaningful tier 2 instruction or tier 3 instruction or core tier 1 instruction also comes with deep teacher knowledge about literacy development, dyslexia. And when we're thinking about providing those interventions, there's a lot of conversations about double dosing and things like that. But if we understand our dyslexic learners, and I have a student that's sitting in 3rd grade and they're currently reading at a 1st grade level, or that's where their foundational gaps are, a double dose of that 3rd grade level is not going to help close that gap. I think schools are still trying to navigate how best to serve students within that setting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about oral language? I love oral language, but how does it play a role in acquiring the reading and spelling skills?
Mm-hmm. Oral language. So I like to call oral language our vehicle for learning. If you think about it, oral language is everything. It is what we use to communicate. It is the foundation of our literacy skills. So a lot of times we may talk about early intervention, which I 100% agree with. And what are the things that we often look for? It's going to be grounded in that oral language. I think the more we can get our students to have opportunities to talk in class, I feel like perhaps that has been, I think we're starting to see more conversations around oral language and its use. But oral language is going to have a direct link to those literacy skills. For our students that have strong oral language skills, they're acquiring vocabulary, they're understanding how language works, and they're able to then apply that in their reading later on at a more advanced level. And then if we're thinking about even looking at oral language, and we're talking about, phonology, well, the ability to look at those single sounds in our language and be able to isolate those sounds and blend those sounds back together and segment those sounds, from a word, all of those link directly to spelling applications as well. So when I am looking at students, and I work at some little schools in my area as well, and I'll go in and I visit my pre-K4 kids. And my little pre-K4 kids who have some language, whether it's syntactical language where their sentence structure's out of order, or if it's articulation components, those little ones are now on my radar. Mm-hmm. And we even do early interventions with pre-K4 targeting that oral language development. So I think oral language is such an important part. And for parents or teachers that are thinking about, oh gosh, for dyslexia, when you have those preschool kids and those kinder kids, pay attention to that language, because that is definitely something that can contribute to reading difficulties later on.
This completes part 1 of our interview with Casey Harrison. Join us next week as we conclude our discussion. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
family,
and teachers.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.